So for those of you who walked in a little late, I'm Gayatri and I run the A.T. Chandra Foundation. The foundation, while set up in 2015, the founders have been investing in capacity building since forever. I mean, I used to be a Teach for India. When I raised funds from Amit and Archana Chandra, their first question was, what is it that nobody else is funding? And I said HR because I was like, I'm going to say it. There's no way he's going to give us HR costs. And he gave us HR costs. Like, he took care of our HR costs. So that was the foundation in my head of what capacity building can do for an organization. What we at the foundation try to do is create sustainable solutions that can be scaled. The solutions can be scaled. I'm not necessarily talking about organization scaling. And the idea is to be able to transform lives. How do we build this ecosystem of learning, though? So at the foundation, our focus is, like I said, capacity building of our NGO partners, but it doesn't end there. Because we are not a huge foundation. We don't get CSR budgets year after year. It's one family's money, a family that's made money in their own lifetime. So our idea is, how do you actually change, and I believe ecosystem is a bad word, but how do you change the ecosystem when it thinks about capacity building? And so while we do fund individual NGOs and leaders in the sector to be able to build their capacities, we write a lot about it, we speak a lot about it, and we try and talk to other donors and NGOs about it so that they see capacity building as the norm. So we're trying to create this system where we're constantly learning and we're constantly doing and building our capacities. We do realize, though, that for a lot of us as nonprofits, and I've been on that side, so I can say this with credibility, it is a tightrope walk. You're focused on programmatic outcomes, but that should not be the end of it, right? And I know I'm speaking to the converted here, but there needs to be this non-glamorous or non-sexy part of actually growing an organization. And while this is a tightrope walk for NGOs, being able to also then convince donors of this balancing act is an even tougher job. Because very often with donor suggestions and donor pushing you, you kind of are wavering on that tightrope. But as leaders of our organization, we need to set the tone for learning, both within our organizations but also outside. And we need to be talking about capacity building as the norm, not something that sits outside of your core work. Right? So as you're thinking about building a program, what are the various functions that come under that, right? There's the leaders of that program. There's the capacity of resources on that program. There's the fundraising aspect. So it needs to be looked at as an all-encompassing thing, not just as, oh, I need to reach so many students and increase their learning outcomes by X, Y, Z, right? Easier said than done. One of the things that we did at the foundation is we have a core group of NGOs that I was telling about. We call them our Center of Excellence. And we work with them on 6 domains of capacity building. So there's HR, fundraising, communications, leadership, strategy, and MEL. We believe, like I said, these need to be part of program. But since they aren't right now, we will invest in these NGOs in these aspects. The condition or the ask from the NGOs is that they allow us to share data of the changes that have been able to accrue in their organizations as a result of this investment. Most recently, 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I'm losing track of time, we had a similar gathering of our NGOs in outside Delhi in Manesar. But all our NGOs would have fit in this section of the room. We had 10 NGOs, 2 or 3 people from each NGO. But it was a beautiful space of learning. We had, as soon as we had NGOs come there and talk about their successes, their challenges, what they've done well, and one aspect they had to present about. So Adhyayan Foundation, for example, they talked about how they build a strong culture despite having a team that's across multiple states and not having a single office where they can all get together. 2 days after the convening, on the WhatsApp group, I could see messages from another NGO that we support in Punjab saying, can we get on a call? Because we want to do something similar. Even though we are only in Punjab, we're across different districts. Then I see photographs of all of them on a Zoom call, sharing screen, exchanging ideas. And I think that for us was the impact of bringing them together. And I don't even know what we spent on bringing them together. It doesn't count to anything when it comes to what they can learn from each other and the impact it'll create on their organizations. But it's the role of the funder doesn't end with bringing people together, right? Or building NGO capacity of a few. It's actually about listening to what happens. What does an NGO need to be able to grow, to be able to thrive, to be able to be resilient? We don't know what's coming tomorrow, but can your NGO survive the next, I hate to say the word, pandemic? Right? How do you grow despite challenges that get thrown on you? And as funders, if we sit in our corner offices with or without a view, we can't support you adequately without hearing your voices. But what happens to those who still get left out? Right? We talk about, Supriya talked about IDR, right? We were one of the early supporters of IDR. But then we pushed IDR and said, can you start doing this in Hindi as well? It took a couple of years, but they started the Hindi program. And I remember the media. The first thing they did was a whole section on capacity building. Like how do you demystify capacity building to a Hindi-speaking audience? And I hope the next step for IDR is more languages. But I also know that language alone is not addressing barriers. We did a research study with Britspan, and it said that NGOs that are led by individuals who come from a Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi background, I'm going to read this out. 70% of them have never had an operating reserve. This compares to about 45% of other NGOs. If we don't, as a group, systematically identify programs that we can support, leaders whose capacities we can build, and amplify their voice, then we're not really doing everything that we set out to do. So even for us at the foundation, that is our next goal post of sorts. And then how do you stay relevant, right? Again, we can create programs sitting here, but it will never be relevant to the entities or to the NGOs that we want to support. So we've worked with Sneha from Atma, we've worked with Ritika from Prava to actually design programs listening to what NGOs at the grassroots require. And I can see, having met some of these NGOs, what it's done for them. So thank you guys for that. But so speaking of impact, right? Saja is one of our Center of Excellence NGOs. In 3 years, we supported them with fundraising costs. Their budget went from 2.29 crores to 4.22. But what I love most is their unrestricted funds. Right? From 20 lakhs, it went to 1.35 crores in 3 years. Their donor retention rates went back just by systematically investing in their people, their processes, and in their case, a little bit of technology. I'll give you one more example, Antarang. Antarang Foundation, look at their beneficiary outreach. It went from 77,000 to 1,78,000. Government partnerships group budget doubled in 3 years. And their unrestricted funds have again, as of last financial year, was about 1 crore. So how did they do that? By embedding the capacity building costs into their funding proposals. So while we gave them funds to do one aspect, say fundraising or HR, in the case of Antarang, it was fundraising and leadership. What we also tell them is that our contribution needs to come down. We'll do something else the next cycle. But in that 3 years, bring in other funders. And the easiest way to do that is to bring those costs into your proposals itself. It's something that a lot of us are a little hesitant to do. And for a reason, right? You have funders saying, no, I'll only do 5%, I'll only do 7%. But bring it in. Keep asking for it, keep asking for it. I say this everywhere. Keep asking for it till it becomes embarrassing for someone to say no. Right? Another NGO, they had their board take care of all their capacity building costs. They said, we don't need to raise it from our donors, our board will take care of it. We told them, you're actually doing a disservice to the sector. They've started doing it now. 15% of their capacity building costs come from existing donors in their existing proposals. And like I talked about earlier, the impact then that we track is not just on, has your program grown, have you, are you reaching more beneficiaries, but really, have you been able to build out those capacities? So we worked with a partner and built out a rubric that helps NGOs themselves. It's not for us to tell them, अच्छा ये नहीं हुआ, वो नहीं हुआ, ये क्यों नहीं किया आपने, उसमें क्यों आपने पैसा नहीं डाला है. It's for NGOs to almost use it as a like a milestone tracker. अच्छा अभी मेरे पास fundraising strategy है, अभी मेरे पास डोनर रिटेंशन प्लान है, वो डोनर रिटेंशन प्लान में ये एस्पेक्ट हमने जोड़ा हुआ है. सो हाउ डू यू, सो इट ऑलमोस्ट बिकम्स लाइक अ ट्रैकर फॉर देम. Sorry, I'm looking to see if Supriya, if she's raising her hand for anything. Happy to share that tracker with anyone who needs. One day when we have a website, we'll put it up, but in the meanwhile, I can email it. And technology, just wanted to say that we think of technology as an enabler. It is never to replace or to substitute the work that individuals can do. It's to help us do things more efficiently and sometimes be able to scale up our work. So finally, where does that leave us, right? Like building an ecosystem of learning for us is not about quick fixes. It's not about a silver bullet. It's about patient collaboration. It's about learning from each other, funders, NGOs, intermediaries, everyone together, to build a system that outlasts us. Like I keep telling my team, if I'm struck down by lightning tomorrow, the work cannot stop, right? Or anybody, anyone in this room. So how do you build out those systems that last beyond us? And build out a resilient, non-profit, thriving society. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Good morning. My name is Nisha. Good to meet you all. And genuinely, again, thank you to Wipro Foundation for always kind of having us up here and having our back. I really do believe any of you could be up here in my place, so I don't know how much I'm going to be able to contribute, but we'll see. So I'm going to take a brief moment to talk about Artsparks Foundation for those who don't know, and then I'll connect it to the work that we do in capacity building. I'm going to try. I'm very technologically unsavvy. Is that it? No, just tell me what I'm going to be pressing. Yeah? Oh, it isn't moving though. Oh, okay, perfect. Okay. So the work that we do is really in response to kind of an issue that we saw with, I think that we all see, with the dominant pedagogy in the context of India, which is, again, how teaching and learning occurs in the classroom. This kind of photo is not unfamiliar, and it could be a beautiful classroom with a lot of images on the walls, etc., but there's still this dynamic between teachers and students, teachers standing in front of the classroom for the most part, teacher as the knowledge giver, the knowledge bearer, students learning from the teacher, and sometimes, oftentimes, a slightly passive manner. But again, even in a so-called engaged classroom, they're still telling the students. And so I think fundamentally at our core, we were really looking at kind of addressing this as an issue and thinking about these three different things. The first of it being changing the way children learn. And for us, that was enabling hands-on experiential learning, but it was also this idea of classrooms tend to be about conformity. Everybody needs to get the right answer. There's one answer. And we wanted to be able to look at how education and learning environments can focus on differences as well, and how can it really kind of look at differences as something valuable to kind of nurture in students. We were also interested, obviously, in looking at the way teachers teach and changing the way teachers teach. And so wanting teachers to use more inquiry-based strategies in the classroom, so less telling, but more asking questions and generating students' responses, and open-ended questions, not close-ended questions, with multiple responses. And enabling a shift of roles from, again, teacher as knowledge bearer to teacher as learner. And really coming in there and saying, I'm going to co-learn with the student, and I might not have all the answers as well. And then finally, also changing, I'm going to look at it from here, changing the views, changing the views about what is worth teaching as well. So again, those notions of what is worth teaching is often driven by these oftentimes very narrow outcomes. We, as our name kind of says, we look at art as a really valuable modality for teaching and learning. But this is true of any subject domain. In art, it's about the product. We're going to create the Madhubani painting, right, or the origami crane. And in other subjects, it's this, one outcome oftentimes dictated by the exams and the tests, et cetera. And so that's something that we wanted to be able to disrupt. And enabling a that's the core of the work that we do, which is that in the 21st century, more than learning the multiplication tables, it's really important to foster certain critical skills and attitudes for children to thrive, given the challenges of the world that we live in. So that means problem solving, flexible thinking, knowing that one problem doesn't just have one solution. How do you communicate effectively, collaborate, and so on and so forth. So in order to do all of this, we set up demonstration sites. It's the model that we very consciously kind of took right from the start. Yesterday, Anurag was talking about scaling and not scaling, and I think that we were really adamant that we did not want to be in 5 million places and set up, 500,000 spaces of learning. But we now have 18. We started with 2 demonstration sites. These are called our creative learning labs, set up within under-resourced government schools in Bangalore, urban and rural. Students 1st through 8th standard access this lab 3 to 4 days a week, depending on the size of the school, during the school day, and it runs again during the entirety of the school year. And again, everything that we talk about the way children learn, et cetera, that happens in this space using the modality of the arts. And there are some of our cute kids as well. And in order to run the labs, we hired women from within the local communities that we work. And these are women who themselves have been marginalized by their lived experiences. Oftentimes, maybe their education was disrupted at the age of 12. They themselves have, a lot of things that they still navigate in their communities, within their families, etc. But we saw them as, again, these uncut gems within this community, and maybe, again, what happens when we create leaders of change within at the grassroots level, what happens to them. So that's the work that we did in our demonstration sites. And the other conscious decision we made right from the start was that we would find an alternate mechanism for scaling. And that alternate mechanism would be capacity building. And so we created this professional learning and development track and vertical, and a program as well. Currently reaches 85 NGOs across 23 states. Wipro has now really kind of been partnering with us on that capacity building, and has been really phenomenal in that endeavor as well. But the idea here in setting up this as a model for scaling, as opposed to being everywhere, was to recognize the deep contextual knowledge and understandings that these individuals have. A partner in Chhattisgarh knows far more about Chhattisgarh than we ever would. And so it makes absolute sense to leverage that. So one aspect was partner with organizations that know their context better than we would ever know. And the other was leverage their expertise and meet them halfway through. And then that way impact a larger swath of children so that the learnings kind of go, but in contextually relevant ways. Because again, there's a difference between us being in Bangalore and somebody being elsewhere. So coming to, again, in the process of capacity building, ArtsParks is and continues to be and continues to consider ourselves a learning organization. And what that means within the organization, we're always testing out, we're always reflecting, we're researching, and all of these kinds of things. And so even our demonstration sites become not just demonstrations of student learning and curricula, but also the development of the people that teach. And so we invest a lot in our facilitators' development. But when we first started our journey, both in terms of our facilitators' development, as well as our development of the organizations that joined our capacity building program, we focused much more. I know there's been a lot of conversation around knowledge transfer versus belief change. And we started by focusing a lot on knowledge transfer. It was about know-how. We have expertise in curricula and designing innovative curricula. We're going to tell you how to design innovative curricula and provide you some of that as well. We have some experiences on training and development, and so we're going to train you on how to execute this innovative curricula. And we did that with our women facilitators as well. And I'm going to just briefly share about the facilitator here. I'm going to change her name, but we'll call her Rupali. And when she joined, she was very quiet. She was very kind of non-participatory in these large group PDs that we would organize for our 32 women facilitators. She would always blend in the background. And she would go into the classroom. She would act as if she was going through everything that we told her. Very amenable, and we assumed that she was going back into the classrooms and doing what she was doing until our program manager started going to the sites and then kind of noticing certain things that weren't happening. We talked about, not telling students things, but asking instead, and we found her telling a lot. We talk about, again, treating all children equally. We found her kind of creating some circumstances where she was elevating some kids and putting down some other kids in the process, etc. And so we very quickly realized some parallels happened in our capacity building program as well. And we very quickly realized that maybe there is an issue with this sole focus on knowledge transfer. And again, in our experimentations and in our research, etc., we started looking more at transformational learning. And we started thinking about belief transformation. And as we started engaging Rupali, here's my faux pas is I have a bad memory with names, so I shouldn't even claim and try. Yes. So what we started doing with her is we started, and the others, we invited them for what we call learning circles in smaller groups. And we saw that just bringing them together in small group settings, 10 in a group as opposed to all 32, suddenly there was more sharing that was occurring within this space. The facilitator, meaning the program managers, et cetera, who are facilitating these learning circles, started demonstrating vulnerability as well, kind of showing again some of the things that might have occurred to them in their early childhood, issues that they still confront in their lives. And it served as a mechanism for our women to start sharing as well. And we started to find out about her lived experiences, about being marginalized in school, about being treated differently, about having a family as well that was unsupportive, that thought of her as not good enough, and a lot of these narratives that kept playing, and how she was unconsciously kind of doing exactly what she had experienced as a child to the people around, to the children around her as well. And so we began to see the learning spaces as kind of a way to start looking at ways to unpack some of these beliefs that these facilitators were kind of confronting and that were kind of were being seen in their pedagogical practices, was being seen in the classrooms, in the lab room settings. We also started creating spaces for action research projects that they could do. So we told them to pick a child and follow that child along and try to get to understand, a child maybe that you're having some difficulties with, and try to understand what is occurring with this child and use that as a way to kind of come back and report on in the learning circles and have discussions around. And we found that started to kind of break apart some of the assumptions that she was carrying. As she started connecting with the lived experiences of the child as well, because she found that behavior was being triggered by things that very similarly happened to her as well. So these were some of the things that we started doing with our women. We started focusing again on learning circles, a lot of sharing, a lot of kind of connecting to past experiences, and a lot of what we called, again, using a term by the famous educator Mesereau, disorienting dilemmas, which is you have an assumption, then you have an experience, and then suddenly your assumptions are being broken apart, and you suddenly realize that maybe I need to rethink this. I'll just kind of quickly go through also this aspect of things, which is even with our capacity building folks, even in the work that we were doing through our professional development arm, we began to see, again, some patterns. I think, again, recognizing that some of the things that we were doing were probably inhibiting learning initially. And one of the things, again, with our capacity building program, in the initial years, we found that people were becoming overtly dependent on us. Again, by focusing on knowledge transfer, they felt most secure when they were with our team. But when they went back to their spaces, they weren't quite implementing. And they would come every once in a while, and they would be refreshed when they were with us, but again, they wouldn't implement in the field. And so then we began to recognize that what does, again, capacity building look like, where you can build ownership in the people that attend these programs as well, and how might we go about doing that. So the first thing we introduced was action learning projects. And the idea with the action learning projects was they would go back into the fields, they would implement in their spaces, and just by implementing, they would see that they could do it. And then the idea was also that they could be open-ended action learning projects. They could come in, if someone had an interest in math education, they could weave that into their action learning project. If someone had an interest in something else, depending on the population they work with, we were very amenable to that as well. We also created communities of practice, kind of taking from our learning circles with our women facilitators. And our communities of practice have become a place where, on a regular basis, you can come together, you can share what you're doing, you can get peer feedback, you can have a problem and someone can offer you a solution. And so this idea, again, of learning can occur in these kinds of spaces, and sometimes even those transformations, because you recognize what someone else is doing and it inspires you for change as well. Yes, I know. I'm historically good at ignoring Supriya, and so I'm going to stop doing that. And so I'm just going to end with this slide, which is just what do we continue to think about as well as we think about working on this in the space of capacity building, both with our folks, but also with the wider ecosystem. This is one aspect that belief change, again, is a process, and it doesn't happen. So how do we, I heard this a lot from other people as well, how do we give time for it? How do we support people through this process of change over a period of time? And the other is that we talk about individuals on any given day navigate multiple environments, sociocultural environments, where there are competing beliefs at play, meaning that on one hand, you're saying to the teacher that you're training or the educator that, teacher is a learner and not the knower of everything. But they go into another space where the belief that teacher is the knower of everything and the knower of all knowledge is very salient. And so we have to be aware of that. And that belief change happens only when you apply and enact upon the kind of change that the new ideas that you've come across. And so giving space. I heard a lot about mind space and also the time space, and I think that's something that we really believe in as well. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have a presentation, and I'm also extremely unprepared for today. But I will nevertheless take the time to have a chat with you. In terms of overall Tata Trust work, I'm not going to go into it. I thought that as part of different things that we have done over the years, one particular initiative within that, some certain amount of work that we ourselves have done and we have done with some partners which is around capacity building. I'll just use that to reflect a little and open up a conversation, hopefully post my little presentation or opening remarks. We will have a longer time for discussion. So the Parag initiative of the Tata Trust, I'm going to talk about some parts of it. So it began really more to address certain sector gaps that got highlighted in our sort of larger strategic plan, and we started working on supporting some development of children's literature in Indian languages. Soon enough, it was fairly evident that creation of good quality content or enabling that in itself doesn't really result in meaningful access or even more than that, meaningful use of that resource. So one of the immediate things that came to our mind, and along with Vidya Bhavan Society, we did a small study of different Tata Trust partners who were trying to do some work around libraries, and one of the key gaps which very clearly emerged is, apart from books being available or not, and the quality, which of course continues to be a very important area of our own work, and I think the larger sectors need, but the educator or the teacher and their own way of looking at children's literature, its use, their own association with how they associate with library space, and non-profit organizations not necessarily being able to systematically build capacity of educators. And I'm not necessarily saying librarians, because in the primary schools we don't have librarians at all. So it is often a NGO facilitator or a primary school teacher or some intermediary between the child and the books that we were talking about. And that is how the whole idea of the library educators course as a blended, structured learning experience, I would say, because we had done a number of small or short-term workshops and trainings, and at the end of those 3 days it would generate a lot of energy, but necessarily a lot of it then got dissipated, and we felt that a more structured learning experience is perhaps needed here, and for working professionals it then took a form of a blended kind of a course with a couple of days of contact and then distance learning, and then again, so there are 3 contacts and in between learning. Similarly, now this library educators course has been running for about 9-10 years, and several of, I think at least some of you I know have been part of it in some capacity or the other. So in terms of creating a learning experience, I think the fact that a course works much better than shorter workshops, experiential elements, trying to bring certain amount of theory in the context of actual practice. So having that experiential element to it, having a structured mentoring element where during the distance period there is a certain amount of hand-holding, field project where again that is mentored, where you get to reflect. Now those are some elements which now 10 years back probably it was a little less common, but now we do see a number of such blended course models, and compared to a purely online kind of learning space and what it is able to do, I do believe that the blended form does have a much stronger transformative kind of an experience. Definitely in terms of knowledge or even a vision for a library and shifting attitudes, I feel the course has been able to get certain things right, but when it comes to practice, to what extent is it enough? Or when it comes to the LEC alumni who then become trainers, I think further then more systematic inputs are needed, and course in itself probably is not sufficient. So it's constantly trying to understand what all are the possibilities as well as limitations of these kinds of learning spaces, and I'm just taking this more as an example. Similarly, with Ektara and Eklavya, through last 5 batches, the Riyaz Academy, which is for illustrators. Now it's a very similar kind of a design of young illustrators meeting for a week every month for 10 months. In order to learn about illustrating for children, but not just about in that process, also learning to understand text deeply, understanding children's literature, learning to kind of read between lines. Again, in that, in terms of the skill aspect of the illustration or even shift in perspective, I feel the course has had some, very important takeaways, but there, for example, during the distance mode, keeping that learning going, or possibly with illustration, and so much of it is sort of actual doing, the distance mode period and keeping that going has been a challenge. So different learning experience wise, I think there are a number of insights, but aspect where I feel we know still very little is the community formation. These are terms which we use, we also use alumni as a learning community, but to keep that community growing and alive and thriving, it's very, very difficult. So it does, in some ways, and reflecting on also this topic, when we are talking about ecosystem, perhaps at best I feel what we can aspire to do and hope to achieve is to sow certain seeds, which some of them will flower, some of them will not, and some of them will take a very long time to kind of grow. So in that sense, if we look at the learning community formation and keeping it thriving, I feel there are many, many unanswered sort of questions or things yet to be discovered. But there again, a few insights is that it is, while some of it can be organic, a lot of it does need a lot of prodding, planning, and keeping at it, sort of, even if when people have that deep personal connect through the sort of in a blended format, because you're meeting in person for certain number of days, certain organic connects happen, but a lot of it does take a good amount of effort to nudge it in different ways for it to sustain over a period of time. And in that, I'll end with not something which is related to Tata Trust's work, but I have myself as a student of education, since then I have been part of this network of alternative schools, and over the several years I have not really attended their meetings, but that I feel is one of the few, I feel, totally voluntary and network of, in a way, learners or practitioners that has sustained for 30 years. And when I reflect on that, while the role of the founders and the initial people who kind of brought it together has been critical, I think the beauty of that network has been the way in which it has been able to include newer people and older people changing their roles and stepping back, and entirely it being kind of driven through the felt need of that group to keep it going. So it's completely voluntary, completely non-funded, and it has also managed to sustain. So I feel, and I think Krunal is part of that network, I feel some of those examples, if we reflect more deeply, we may not be able to replicate, and I don't think we really need to replicate things all the time, but it may give us some reflections on what are some of the elements that in our own work, do they apply, can we build on that, can we take some learnings out of that. So basically I'll stop here. I hope I'm within time, and I would love to have more questions from you and respond to that rather than my monologue.
Thanks once again to all three of you. I think it was wonderful and reinforced and reiterated some of the ideas that we've been speaking about over the last 2 days, right? The need for trust, the need to give things time, the need for collaborations, the need In fact, I think things that have come out time and again is these facilitated collaborative communities, the need for us to get together. And I think what Avinash was talking about on day one, fraternity is something that we were speaking about. And I think that is what we were also, came up in all of your sharing as well. So thank you so much. And thank you for also kind of, we are on time. So I think we have rounds for a couple of rounds of questions. There are several hands up in the middle. And Shweta, I did see your hand up today. So maybe Shweta, I think there was Jiten right at the back. Anybody from that side? No? Okay, Namita right at the back. So 3 questions at a time and then we'll come back for more. So Shweta, Namita and Jit. Okay, Shweta, Jiten and Namita.
Yeah, thank you, Supriya. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful panel discussion. I'm Shweta from Unmukt Foundation, and my question is to Gayatri. So you mentioned about technology in capacity building. So how you're doing it, anything innovative or radical you're using in technology? And second is, how do you select organizations? Because the 2 examples you gave, so my question was like, do you select low budgeted organization or what is it, this selection criteria? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jiten from Chlorophyll Foundation. I wanted to know from Nisa, I actually was taken aback in terms of looking at your presentation, and all my timelines flew as you spoke. Means when I read the name of the Arts Park, and my team has already participated in that, but the kind of engagement you have with the facilitator, are you really thinking to take it further for the larger ecosystem? Because that is one of the things I actually see is needed on the ground today with the changing development paradigm and the kind of people who are getting nowadays into the development. So are you really thinking about it?
Hi everyone. My question is largely to maybe Amrita and Gayatri as well. This is a space that we have created. Wipro has created forum for learning from peers, right? We are aware that there is a huge, the way there are classroom disparities that we see on the ground. There is a huge disparity among funders at national level and state level. Thanks to magazines like IDR, which we get to share with our donors at state level and make them aware of what national level thoughts are going on. But the way Wipro has gathered us for a peer learning community, is there a peer learning community for funders between national and state level as well to make it happen and to see, like there have been huge changes in CSRs in the last 10 years that we see. What is the next 10 years for those funder community looking like? Yeah.
Should we go in order? Okay. To your question on technology, so like I said, we see it as an enabler. So it could be systems, HR systems, it could be fundraising trackers, or it could be systems that actually help programmatic scale. One of the NGOs, for example, that we support is Tech for Dev, where they have multiple programs. One is they have a fractional CTO. So an NGO can get a CTO level person for 1/3 of the cost, because that CTO is shared among 3 NGOs. They have other open source products that they've been able to create that NGOs can then use. Your second question on how we select, we have tried to look at NGOs from different sectors. We've tried to look at NGOs from different sizes as part of the cohort. So we have the 2 smaller ones you saw today, but we also have one NGO which has got a 40 crore budget, another one with a 60 crore budget. I mean, they've also grown over the last 3 years. So it's looking at, we're trying to see how we can take to the world the fact that infusing capacity building in any size NGO, any sector NGO, direct implementation versus a kind of a research-based organization, a think tank, it can all have larger programmatic outcomes. Should I go to the last question also? There are informal donor groups that meet, that talk, that share ideas. I will say though that we have attempted through one of our partners to create a program for donors, either philanthropists or CSR heads to come together. Unfortunately, 3 people signed up. We will not give up, we'll keep trying. But I think there is a lot that we can learn from each other, but I think also learning a lot from our NGOs.
Thanks so much for your question. Is this working? Okay. You can never tell, so that I'm not screaming. But thank you so much for your question. We're continually, it is really interesting to see what's happening with our women facilitators. We've been really studying, again, where they came from, their experiences, what's contributing to their transformation and their capacity building, what more needs to be done. I myself am in the midst of doing some doctoral research on this specific aspect and looking at, again, how might the findings from the research be something that we can actually share at a larger scale. So yes, the hope is that this could be something that we can then be able to talk about and share, and again discuss on how it might be in different contexts as well. Arts Plus Plus. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So on your question, I feel there is very little learning that happens across funders in my experience. Couple of instances where if you are working together on setting up something, that is where operationally and in that process and then conceiving and actually doing it, there is, I think, genuine amount of learning that is possible, and some experiences of trust having worked with someone else, could be international donor or could be a local smaller donor funder of a certain kind. But as a forum, I feel that community does not really have a genuine peer kind of sharing, meeting, reflecting, and honestly looking at our own role, I feel. So that's my view. In terms of the next 10 years, while I really I'm not somebody who thinks that much ahead, but I do see there are a number of changes in terms of a lot of excitement about the so-called additional money that CSR may bring. I think we now have a more sobering experience of what that landscape looks like. Even for organizations like Tata Trust, we have historically worked with a large number of partners. We have continued to do so. In between, we have looked at directly ourselves working on the ground. I think in terms of somewhere for the funding community, honestly looking at our role and what is it that you can enable and what you can't, that is really I feel very important. When in some ways with the kind of changing FCRA, when I think international funders played a certain kind of role within the ecosystem. So there's a lot of reflection that is possible. May not be right now the right time to get into it. But separately, one-on-one, happy to chat with you.
Okay, so next set of questions, I think maybe Rajesh here, so you behind Ritika, and we can take Preeti and Vikas. So 4 questions.
I'm Rajesh from Lokmitra. My question is that learning so many things are quite overwhelming. So, and there could be something fundamental in the learning how to learn, learning how to be effective learner. So is there something inbuilt in all these capacity building efforts that you do? So I'm wondering if you do that overtly, that would be better rather than assuming that it will happen somehow. And I think without that, it becomes really challenging. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Purushottam from AWMH Maharashtra. My question to Nisha. So this is art therapy, I suppose. This is similar to art therapy for learning of mainstream children. So how do you relate this art therapy while teaching to children with intellectual and development disabilities?
Kirti from OELP. Thanks, that was an amazing session. My question is to Nisha. One is, do you engage with the mainstream system, and if so, how does that look? The second question is capacity building for your mentors to engage with the wider ecosystem. How does that look? I see a lot of parallels in our work because we're also trying to work through a demonstration-based capacity building. So I'm very excited about the work you're doing.
Hello, my question is to Amrita. My name is Vikas Kumar. जैसा कि हम लोग मतलब 2021 से ही लाइब्रेरी को लेकर के काम कर रहे हैं, ओवर द टाइम एक चीज़ें हमें सेंस होने लगा कि लाइब्रेरी को लेकर के जो क्रॉस ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन ऑफ लर्निंग है लैंग्वेज में जो हो रहा है लैंग्वेज डेवलपमेंट में, तो आप कैसे देख रहे हो लैंग्वेज टीचिंग का आगे फ्यूचर? और इस सीन में जबकि एक ही एससीईआरटी का टेक्स्ट बुक और एक एफएलएन का अभी किट पकड़ा दिया गया है और उससे हम चाहते हैं कि ग्रेड 3 या ग्रेड 4 के बच्चे का लैंग्वेज अचीवमेंट हो जाए, और फिर एक बात जो लाइब्रेरी पे आके अटकती है और एक वर्ड है वो जॉय की वजह से हम शायद लैंग्वेज तक नहीं पहुंच पाते, कहीं ना कहीं वही एक अब्स्ट्रैक्शंस है. But how you are seeing language teaching is going to be transformed in India in next 10 years?
How will it be transformed? How will it be transformed? I really don't know. I hope it will be transformed because जिस तरीके से भाषा शिक्षण हमारे क्लासरूम्स में चलता आ रहा है उसमें बहुत सारी दिक्कतें बहुत सारे लेवल्स पे हैं. यदि हम और आप खास करके गया के डाइट में काम भी कर रहे हैं तो प्री सर्विस से भी वो शुरुआत हो जाती है कि जहाँ पे आपको पहली से 5वीं के कक्षा के बच्चों को सिखाना है, लेकिन आप खुद उस समय एक आपके पास लिटरेसी रीडिंग का कोर्स भी आप ना करते हुए क्लासरूम में आते हो, आपने कभी लाइब्रेरी और बच्चों के साहित्य से दोस्ती नहीं की है और आप एक शिक्षक वहाँ बन के आ रहे हो, तो कई बार आपने जैसे सीखा आपके क्लासरूम में वैसे आप कर रहे हो. जैसे निशा was also sharing about the facilitator. I think all of us then largely go back to our own experiences consciously or subconsciously. लेकिन in terms of the hope, I do feel that with the focus on foundational learning, simultaneously some amount of focus on creation and availability, larger amount of availability of more meaningful reading material, it seems like a exciting possibility where the language literacy instruction can really not be restricted to textbooks, and it can sort of draw from multiple meaningful sources of reading, which is what will really motivate and bring that joy and sort of not sort of compartmentalize between a very rote instruction of textbook and then somewhere you have to figure out a joy of reading later. So I think the answer is to have the language instructional pedagogy transformed. I hope together we will be able to make some dent on it actually.
Thank you. I would love to respond to your comment and somewhat question as well, because just yesterday a colleague of mine and myself were talking about how in a lot of spaces there's so much of different perspectives that are shared along the way, and how does somebody make sense of it? And sometimes they may be diametrically different perspectives as well.
And so we talked about, even in learning environments, this is also something now in university teaching, they talk about the assumption that the people are self-directed learners, right? And that they come and they know how to pick and choose from the various different things that are shared with them. But maybe that needs to be taught, that we can't make an assumption that everybody is a self-directed learner, that we need to learn how to be self-directed in our learning so that when we have a variety, we know how to choose from it. So I think that your comment was really resonant because it is something that we often wonder and grapple with as well. To respond to your question, so what ArtSparks does is not art therapy, which is another kind of field of expertise that's more associated with psychiatry, and it's much more rooted in the psychological development of individuals. We're more in the education sphere, so we're in the domain of art education. But that being said, we absolutely do encounter and serve children with special needs, because a lot of our government schools do not have any paraprofessionals or any support systems for children with disabilities. And so when I mentioned one of the things that we want to change in the way children learn and the way teachers teach is also creating an emphasis that differences is good, and even how we view education, right? Move away from the notion that it's all about conformity, that Nisha needs to perform exactly like Supriya, and we're competing and vying for marks, but say that no, Nisha is a very different person than Supriya. And so we've had a government school where there was a child with MR, and that child was being, again, not really included in any other classroom. And this was an inclusive space that the child was coming. We talk about this with our facilitators, with capacity building, and with our children, that the space we create is a safe and a brave space, where you can come in, you can, again, be included. We have rules of engagement in the space, how we include each other. So, you know, with children with MR, again, you're not shunned, you're included. With children with physical disabilities, some of the materials are really valuable for fine and gross motor skill development. We've even worked with children with CP, and you know how clay is a wonderful medium for them. So I think that's something that, you know, we recognize and say we do need to create more inclusive spaces for learning. Kirti, I think that you were asking the question of how do we work in a mainstream environment, right? So we do work within the government school system. We have Bangalore Urban and Rural, our 18 demonstration sites, our creative learning labs. We have an MOU with Samagraha Shikshana Karnataka. And we also not just engage with the children, and part of this keeping, having it run during the school day. It's a 1.5 hour to 2 hour session during the school day. That's huge. But that means that we're also working a lot with the stakeholders. We're working with the parents, with the SDMC members, with the teachers, doing teacher training and development with them, with the HMs, with the BE officers, with kind of everybody in the ecosystem as well. Advocacy is a big aspect of what we do, educating, giving them those opportunities as well, immersive opportunities, have them observe, have them experience, because we really believe in that experience as well. So that's really how we kind of, and we wanted to be specifically, it comes with its challenges too, because when an HM retires, a really great HM retires, and someone who does not believe, and arts in the hierarchy of subjects in India is always at the bottom of the totem pole. And here, a lot of what we are doing is elevating the positionality of the arts and saying no longer should the arts be seen as a skill and a talent and something fun to do, but it's work, it requires the mind. It's, again, the word non-cognitive is used for the arts oftentimes, and we want to change that. So that advocacy work becomes really critical to mainstreaming, and we wanted to have it during the school day so we can demonstrate to others and say, this is not an after school, this is not happening in a private school, but this is happening in government schools with all its challenges as well. You had one more question though, right? About the women? Oh, for the mentors. So I think that, again, you know, a lot of like, so even as an organization, I said that we're continuously learning, myself included, and the idea of learning never ends. So even the program team is constantly going through kind of their own kind of self-reflection of their learning journeys. Everybody, even the women facilitators, create vision plans. They all contribute. We're trying also, how do we break hierarchies? I think the benefit of smaller organizations and smaller teams, how do we break hierarchies? How do our women also become content developers? The facilitator shared is flying to Delhi next week to do training and development for a group of people over there. And so these kinds of things then, so it's not just, again, there's someone giving training, but everybody's part of that process of learning. Sorry, everybody's, clearly I'm not savvy with holding mics, so, but hopefully that may
Anyone from this side? Okay, Sneha, and maybe Devashish right at the back.
Thanks for the engaging conversation. I think I have just one observation and one question. The observation actually was on how, even on the panel, and I think even with us, and we do a lot of capacity building work, there doesn't seem to be a very common definition of that term, right? Like even from all of you, I heard it being used in different ways. I think one was as a training methodology that you are building the capacity of another organization. The other is also to look at it sitting separately from programs, quote unquote, right? So everything that program doesn't cover, capacity building does. So I think just an observation, no answer or anything here, but I think there probably is a need to break that term down and really explain it better for common understanding. My question is to Gayatri actually, and there was a study that the A.T. Chandra Foundation had done on L&D programs that you support. I was wondering if there are any insights from that that you can share with us in terms of how does learning and development happen in the sector for nonprofits?
Sure. So we've been funding learning and development programs now since inception, I think for the last 10 years. And again, we would tell our partners, bring another funder in. Don't depend only on us. Make sure that there are more funders looking at learning and development. And the feedback from them very often was, but nobody wants to fund this. Then we'd say, okay, get participants to pay some part of the cost. And they said, participants don't want to pay, but they want to do the program. So we said, okay, let's do a study to understand, is this really helping? Because maybe we are wrong. And if this is helping, then let's give this data back to our partners and to other donors saying like, look, this helps. So we got a third-party valuation agency to do this study for us. The report should be out in another couple of weeks, but I'll give you the highlights. It helps. It helps both individual capacity building, learning and development, obviously. That we were all quite sure of, I'm confident. But it also, we found it has an impact on the organization itself. And because of their ability to influence their organization, there's also impact on the sector as a whole. So at 3 levels, we've been able to see that impact. Hold on, you'll see the report very soon.
हेलो, मेरा नाम देवशीष है और मैं असम से हूँ. हमारे संस्था का नाम सतीर्थ फाउंडेशन है. तो thanks to all 3 of you for this wonderful and engaging conversation. मेरा सवाल अमृता जी से है, क्योंकि मैंने खुद लाइब्रेरी एजुकेटर्स कोर्स ज्वाइन किया है और क्योंकि मैं असम से आता हूँ, तो एक तो है जब हम चिल्ड्रंस लिटरेचर की बात करते हैं तो काफ़ी ज़्यादा इंग्लिश या फिर हिंदी तक सीमित है. तो रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस खास करके असमीज़ और नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न लैंग्वेजेस में बहुत कम चिल्ड्रंस लिटरेचर अवेलेबल है. और जब बच्चे हमारे पास आते हैं और पूछते हैं कि क्यों किताबें अवेलेबल नहीं हैं, तो ये काफ़ी हमारे लिए एक मुश्किल सवाल होता है. तो इसको कैसे देखा जा सकता है, या फिर टाटा ट्रस्ट कैसे देख रहा है इसको. और एक दूसरा सवाल है कि जब कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग, मतलब एक साथ जुड़ा हुआ है, क्योंकि जब कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग की भी बात आती है तो लैंग्वेज एक बहुत बड़ा रोल प्ले करता है, क्योंकि हमने काफ़ी टाइम पे देखा है कि नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न पार्ट्स या फिर असम से भी जो लोग आते हैं तो वो काफ़ी इंग्लिश या फिर हिंदी के लैंग्वेज के एक माहौल में काफ़ी सहम जाते हैं या फिर उनके वो इतना सीख नहीं पाते. तो लाइब्रेरी या फिर एजुकेशन के किसी भी ऐसे डोमेन पे जब कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग की बात आती है तो इसको कैसे हम देख सकते हैं, या फिर मतलब हमारे जैसे रीजन्स पे कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग को और ज़्यादा कैसे इंक्लूसिव, मतलब लिंग्विस्टिकली इंक्लूसिव किया जा सकता है? थैंक यू।
नहीं, मैं ज़रूरत तो बहुत है और उसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है। अभी हमारे काम के अंतर्गत कन्नड़ में और एक हमने डायरेक्टली उसमें थोड़ा ही रोल प्ले किया है, लेकिन मराठी में इस तरह का एक लाइब्रेरी एजुकेटर नुमा कोर्स बन रहा है। शायद बांग्ला में कुछ उस दिशा में कोशिश हो रही है। मेरे ख्याल से आसाम में इस तरह का स्ट्रक्चर्ड इस तरीके का कोर्स नहीं है, लेकिन कई एलईसी अलमनाए हैं जिन्होंने छोटे वर्कशॉप्स डिज़ाइन किए हैं। तो उसका कोई मैंने ज़रूरत बहुत है, शायद उसको अलग अलग तरीके से सपोर्ट करने का के रास्ते ढूंढने की ज़रूरत है। उसमें सिर्फ इसमें फंडिंग ये एक छोटा मुद्दा है, क्योंकि आप इस तरीके का कोई भी ऑफरिंग है तो फैकल्टी और उसके अच्छे रीडिंग्स, और सिर्फ ट्रांसलेटेड रीडिंग्स नहीं तो ओरिजिनली लिखा हुआ उसमें कुछ रिफ्लेक्टिव जो पढ़ने में मिले, तो इसलिए वो एक काफ़ी बड़ा अंडरटेकिंग है और इसीलिए वो थोड़ा मल्टीपल उसके फैक्टर्स जेल होंगे तब वो शुरू होगा। मैंने रिलेटिवली ईजियर पार्ट में बी टू ऑफर एक्स अमाउंट ऑफ resources to get it started, but this kind of work will require or every funder loves to talk about sustainability, but in these kinds of things it is very difficult to have a course which will self sustain. तो ये सब दिक्कतों में मुझे लगता है कि शुरुआत कहीं ना कहीं की जाए, ये शायद रास्ता है कि ठीक है फुल फंक्शनिंग कोर्स शायद टाइम लगेगा, पर अलग अलग तरीके के कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग की शुरुआत होती है तो उसमें से कुछ और बेहतर निकल के आएगा. सिमिलरली विथ चिल्ड्रंस लिटरेचर इन डिफरेंट इंडियन लैंग्वेजेस, again in my view it is lesser of a money issue, again in that language, because production of children's literature is a very serious task and it requires skill sets which are of a very high order of including specialization in that. तो उसमें किस तरीके से इमर्जिंग पब्लिशर्स या ग्रुप्स जो पब्लिश कर पाएंगे उनके साथ किस तरीके का काम हो रहा है, तो उसमें कोलैबोरेटिवली जैसे एकलव्य ने आयांक के साथ कुछ किया तो वो शायद उस तरीके के एक्सपेरिमेंट से हमें कुछ रास्ते मिलेंगे, क्योंकि कमर्शियल पब्लिशिंग शायद लैंग्वेजेस में बहुत वायबल होना अपने आप में उसमें मार्केट तैयार नहीं है. So again, while I don't have one answer, I do have a reason to believe that there are some really wonderful experiments taking place in small scale, and hopefully it will take us. And Assam जैसी जगह में सिर्फ आसामीज में नहीं, आपको बहुत सारी भाषाओं में साहित्य चाहिए, तो कुछ है डेफिनेटली जो हम अपने क्लासरूम्स में क्या क्या बना सकते हैं अपने काम के लिए, लेकिन वो भाषा में उसकी बढ़ोतरी होने के लिए बहुत एक अलग लेवल का इकोसिस्टम बिल्डिंग का काम मैं सोचती हूँ कि ज़रूरी है.
थैंक यू.